Assault mode engaged.
Well, it's finally here, the long-awaited follow-up to id Software's Doom Eternal with Doom the Dark Ages. The prequel story we never knew we wanted for one of gaming's most badass protagonists. A guy who's really mastered the art of if looks could kill. And if you're like me and you've been frothing over this thing for the last 6 months, then you'll no doubt be stoked to finally be able to play it. And after having beaten this thing twice, I can honestly say that id Software have delivered, in that this is a Doom game, kind of. It's just instead of it being rip and tear, it's more like parry and tear, with one new game mechanic fundamentally impacting how the whole thing plays overall. And while I do like some aspects of what they've achieved here, there are some other things that really have me raising an eyebrow, kind of questioning everything I once held dear. I can still wholeheartedly recommend it though, just with a few caveats. I'll also be doing my best to keep spoilers to an absolute minimum, and I've done my best to not use footage from any of the late chapters or key cinematics. Having said all of that, let's get into it.
Slayer, prepped for launch.
Right, so the story takes place before the events of Doom Eternal and 2016, at a point when the Slayer is being kept under control by the Makers, who are that weird alien race that want to basically use hell as an energy source. The overarching plot is about the Makers working with King Novik and his Knight Sentinels and the Slayer during a demonic uprising, where a guy named Prince Azrak is assuming control of the Horde and trying to capture Argent D'Nur.
I will be informing the High Council of your progress.
With there also being lots of references to old gods and all that other lovely Lovecraftian stuff that the internet just can't seem to get enough of. If you're at all familiar with what happens in Doom Eternal though, then you remember that the Makers aren't exactly the good guys. And although the Slayer is essentially forced to work for them and put to use for what seems like the right reasons, allegiances shift about the game and eventually ends up working more in line with the Knight Sentinels.
They lied to us.
Particularly with Novik's daughter, Commander Thera, who kinda looks like a player model out of Quake 3 Arena, and one who has vastly more screen time than even our boy does.
Bishop Creed, we need him.
And that is the dilemma you face with this kind of character, where you've got someone who's essentially mute, but then you also need to convey all this lore and information with all these other various groups and factions. Which means that every single cutscene is just everyone else talking, while the Slayer, if he's even there to begin with, stands in the background brooding away. I also think I speak for almost everyone here as well when I ask, what the fuck is going on with this story? I mean, honestly, like, I kind of followed it for a little bit at the start there, but when we ended up in the cosmic realm, and Cthulhu gods appeared and started walking around, I just got absolutely lost. I did find the cinematics in this to often be incredibly disjointed as well, where you might get like a really cool one at the end of a level where all this stuff kicks off, only for the chapter to abruptly end. And then when the next one starts, it's like there's been a time jump or something we weren't told about, because everyone's now back at base or in a completely different area. It's like, remember how at the start of Doom Eternal, how it all just kicked off with the Slayer at his little fortress of solitude in space and never explained how we got there? Yeah, well, that's what happens quite a lot here, where it just feels like there was another cutscene missing in between to explain what happened. The ending is also kind of abrupt as well, and doesn't even really tell us or show us anything. So if you're expecting it to seamlessly pivot into what happens in 2016 or Eternal, well then don't. Plus, it's also kind of hilarious in hindsight, looking back at all those people desperately trying to make Quake connections here, and now having finished it and seeing it literally has no Quake references at all. I mean, maybe there's some kind of obscure Easter egg hidden away somewhere, but outside of the whole Lovecraftian aspect and some of the medieval aesthetics, which I still don't think even fully looks like Quake anyway, there really is no connection. Having said that though, there is a whole lot of cool looking shit in this game, and some of the cutscenes still gave me goosebumps on my arms and balls. All that stuff involving the cosmic realm, which I'm not going to spoil or show at all, is incredibly awesome, and the art style of these areas alone really deserves some kind of award. This is the first game to run on that id Tech Engine 8, and I think one of the biggest crimes of the modern gaming age is that more developers don't use this engine, because damn son, it's often absolutely gorgeous. And a lot of the new stuff involving all the Knight Sentinels and their armies is very reminiscent of Warhammer 40k, with a whole pseudo-science fiction vibe, and then the things like these large mech suits firing off humongous weapons.
More Titans ahead. Support team, deploy weaponry.
There's also some very underappreciated skyboxes in this game, and if you ever spend the time to go off and look off into the distance, you're gonna see some awesome looking vistas, where you can see these epic battles just roaring off there on the horizon. It is also worth mentioning as well, and this isn't sponsored by Nvidia by the way, but this does come with those Nvidia features as well, like DLSS 4 and ray tracing. Despite running buttery smooth the entire time with all of the settings maxed out, I do have to say that I did have some pretty consistent crashing and freezing issues. However, I'm really hoping that this is more to do with me just playing this before any kind of day one patch. Now, at least on a basic level, this does have all of the hallmarks of a Doom game, with there even being some series veterans making a return like the Imps, the Mancubus, and the Arachnotrons, along with a new variant of the Whiplash, which is somehow even more annoying. Plus, there's even some older faces that we've not seen for a while, like the Nightmare Imps, which I don't think have been in a Doom game since Doom 64. I will say too that this is definitely one of the easiest Doom games we've had in a long time, especially coming off some of those crushing sequences in the Ancient Gods Part 1 and 2, where again Ultra Violence is really the normal difficulty, with Nightmare being hard moded, then Ultra Nightmare really just being for masochists. And it does seem like the best way to play this is either on Ultra Violence or Nightmare. I mean, I did mess around with both of these to see the differences, and you can get away with so many mistakes on Ultra Violence, whereas on Nightmare, it's still a case of if you slip up once or twice, it's pretty much curtains. The thing is, I'd say the difficulty mode doesn't mean all that much anymore anyway, considering you can customize every single aspect of it at any time with these new sliders, which is great in the sense that it lets everyone cater the experience to their own preferences, making it as easy or hard as you really want to. Either way though, you very quickly figure out how to approach each scenario, with it being that very familiar gameplay loop, where the combat's a combination of focusing on the heavy demons and then using those fodder demons in the area to manage your resources. Instead of a chainsaw to regain your ammo, you've got a few melee weapons, with the first being the Slayer's Gauntlet, which offers up a standard punch, able to be used 3 times in a row before it has to recharge. After that, you get the Flail, which is just an objective upgrade, and does way more damage, along with also staggering nearby enemies. Before finally, the last weapon, which is the Dread Mace, really the closest we get to an actual chainsaw, considering it only has 1 charge and can kill most demons in a single hit. Refilling all of your ammo with a single use, whereas the other weapons only refill smaller segments. I don't think it's even possible to overstate just how broken this thing is. I mean, it really does even make short work of the toughest enemies. And when you get that upgrade that lets you use it twice after a successful parry, even more so. Either way though, all of this stuff is important because, much like Doom Eternal, resource management plays a huge part in the overall gameplay loop, with the player still largely in control of how much health, armor, and ammo they have. It's like if you're running low on health, well, then go off and kill some of the fodder enemies to top up again. Need more armor? Whip out the shotgun and set something on fire. Or take out those grunts armed with the shields. And then if you want more ammo, well, you just whack someone in the face a bunch of times until you're topped up again. Instead of glory kills now, we've got executions, which really still achieves the same result, along with a glory strike, which weakens a tougher demon without actually killing them, which is definitely like a lot quicker and less detailed than some of those animations we got in Doom Eternal, a lot of which were just amazingly creative. Still though, some of these are pretty gnarly, like the one for the Mancubus for instance, where the Slayer cuts the thing from head to taint, slicing it right down the middle like he's dissecting a carcass.
Damn.
but it's not really offering up anything super new in all that regard, and it's very easy to quickly fall back into that familiar rhythm of using all of these elements in the game well to your advantage. What is the new game changer though, quite literally, is the Slayer's new shield, which is something that's been plastered onto every piece of advertising material, and yeah man, rightly so, considering this new addition is an integral component to the gameplay. It's the kind of thing that makes Captain America's shield look like a frisbee in comparison. And not only can you use it to shred through the fodder demons, but you're going to need it to block and parry the unrelenting and never-ending attacks from those tougher enemies. Where with the simple press of a button, the Slayer's going to hold this thing up and then can avoid all incoming damage. Or if you time it just right against an enemy's incredibly telegraphed attack, you can parry it and knock them off balance. Yeah, because this is a game coming out in 2025, and it seems like it's an unwritten law at this point that every single game has to have a parry mechanic. Honestly, it's pretty simple stuff. Red attacks can only be blocked, but green attacks can be parried. And in the case of projectiles, often sent right back to their sender. With some pretty awesome sound design, making this all feel impactful and satisfying, with loud, chunky effects that make it seem like you're deflecting howitzer shells. In fact, ironically, a lot of the time you end up putting yourself in the direct line of fire for these projectiles, just so you can deflect them and reap the benefits. You can also lock onto enemies and do a shield charge, flying into them from a distance, which is great for stunning the bigger ones, and then just obliterating those fodder demons. But I also just found it really good for quickly closing the distance so I could execute something as well. Another big component of the gameplay is how the demons are all covered in heavy armor, and after heating their armor up through basic attacks, a quick throw of the shield is going to cause that armor to shatter, resulting in not only some pretty sweet ASMR, but then also leaving these enemies vulnerable to other attacks. Also then opening up what I think has to be one of the best crowd control mechanics in the game, where after you've unlocked that razor attachment, the shield can be thrown into enemies, where it just lodges into them and essentially locks them in place, making it easy to wail on them completely unhindered, which is a feature that is a literal lifesaver against some of those tougher demons. There is also some variety in there with the parrying thanks to the shield runes, which gives you a bunch of different bonuses. So like the first one you get sends out a spread of lava on the ground, doing damage to anything that's caught up in the blast. The second one sends out a bunch of spectral knives doing extra damage as well, and then the third one makes a small turret pop out, shooting nearby enemies. With the final one then causing a lightning bolt to drop down and shock enemies, which, yeah, is pretty awesome. I mean, look, like I might be a grumpy old man reaching the ripe age of 40, but the simple sight of someone getting struck by a lightning bolt is still enough to entertain me. The thing is as well is that you have to use this shield. In fact, your very livelihood depends on it, because the movement speed in the Dark Ages is a lot slower than it was before, and either blocking or parrying attacks is absolutely essential. And you'll really realize how important it is if you ever temporarily break it, which seems to happen from mostly blocking too many of those red projectiles, where you then feel about as defenseless as a kitten with a $100 bill tucked into its collar. Occasionally you might have to use it to get around the environment, like for breaking chains or using it to grapple up to higher ledges, but the majority of its uses come during the combat, and it's a mechanic you just can't get around. And it's all kind of funny to me because one of the main criticisms that Doom Eternal had was how a lot of people said the game forced you to play it a certain way. So now what they've done here is essentially double down on that with this whole shield mechanic. A mechanic which, by the way, feels wholly un-Doom-like. I mean, Doom's always been about avoiding damage, staying mobile and dodging attacks, not hunkering down and taking all that damage head on. As for the weapons, if nothing else, this is a pretty solid lineup, where what it does is give you 2 weapons for each slot, with each of them using the same ammo type but offering up different effects. For instance, the rocket launcher and the grenade launcher sharing the same spot. The thing I found though is that some of these are really outmatched by their alternate versions, or in some instances just kinda redundant to begin with the first example being the super shotgun, which I think just kinda pales in comparison to the usefulness of the basic shotgun.
In the quiet words of the Virgin Mary, come again.
Now I kinda touched on this in my preview video, but to quickly reiterate, the standard shotgun has an upgrade which gives it a burst fire mode, along with another one that also lights enemies on fire, causing them to drop armor shards. Which means you not only get the damage benefit of a burst fire, but also incredibly necessary armor shards. And spamming the tougher demons and even the bosses with this thing is an effective tactic that really works throughout the entire game. Compared to the super shotgun, which, yeah, does really good damage, but that's about it. Not to mention, it has a much shorter range. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, this thing still absolutely fucks. But I really just ended up using it when I got bored and wanted to mix things up, and I think it really still loses out to the standard shotgun. The other example is with the Shredder and the Impaler. Now the Shredder is more or less your heavy cannon, just a fast firing machine gun kind of weapon, whereas the Impaler fires off a single slow moving projectile that does way more damage, just with an insane amount of drop off. However, this thing can pretty much kill the imps and even the Hell Knights with a single well-placed headshot. Whereas with the Shredder, you've really got to lean on the fire button for a few good seconds to actually kill something. It's a similar deal again with the Skull Crusher and the Ravager. Now the Skull Crusher is that incredibly cool looking gun that uses crushed skulls as an ammo source, yes, hence the name. Which also comes with the incredibly cool visual bonus of practically shredding enemies to pieces, rending flesh from their bones in real time. The only catch there is that its range is pretty short. And then you find the Ravager, which is more or less the exact same weapon, only with much more range, just objectively making it a superior option. Plus the Ravager's got an upgrade that causes enemies' hit bite to constantly drop health pickups, which as you can imagine is a much useful advantage. So yeah, again, like another example of one weapon really being outclassed by another. In lieu of like a traditional plasma rifle, we've got the Accelerator and the Cycler, both of which really do function the same, just being given different names. And both of which serve as a way of being able to quickly deal with enemies holding energy shields, because again, like a few shots are going to cause those things to explode. But even then, like you can unlock an ability early on that lets you do this with the shield anyway. Yeah, there's like an early upgrade here that makes it so this thing's going to bounce off energy shields, chaining to nearby enemies as well, which yeah, is not only super useful, but a lot quicker than swapping out to the Accelerator or the Cycler for a single enemy.
That's a good idea.
The Accelerator does have an upgrade where it overheats from firing too much, and then you can expunge all that excess heat, kind of similar to the Plasma Rifle mod in Doom 2016. And then the Cycler has the ability to shock demons, which stuns them and also nearby enemies, but neither of these seem to do all that much damage to armor, which is something that becomes really important later on. About halfway into the game, you get the grenade and the rocket launcher, but again, neither of these I really found myself using all that much. And that's not to say that either of these are bad. In fact, the grenade launcher in particular has an upgrade where every second direct hit also drops a cluster of smaller grenades. And if you've got a nice wide open space to use it, you can spam this thing relentlessly and get some nice results. Plus, the rocket launcher's got a super useful upgrade too, where after parrying an attack, splash damage actually heals you for a few seconds, which kind of gives you carte blanche to spam it at point blank range without any kind of dramas. But outside of a couple of instances when I had to use these things to get one of the challenges complete, I just never found myself wanting to use either of them, because all of these guns are just overshadowed by what's hands down the best weapon in the game with a chain shot.
Now you're all in big trouble.
Now I gotta say I was a bit hesitant of this thing from the short time I had with it in the demo, but after having used it in the full game, I realised just how misplaced that was, considering how much damage this weapon does to enemy armor. I mean, a fully charged up attack can usually knock an enemy's armor off in a single hit, on Nightmare difficulty of all things. Yeah, which is really crucial on a difficulty where you really don't want to be dicking around with the enemy for longer than you have to. Plus the range on it is a lot further than you'd think, which again renders weapons like the super shotgun and the impaler completely redundant. Not only that, but there's an upgrade where after parrying an attack, it charges the weapon up. So you can bypass that 2-second long wind up and just fire off a fully charged off shot instantly. Which for enemies where you spend 90% of the time parrying, like the Cyber Demon, becomes really effective. In fact, I honestly reckon you could get through the entire game just by using this weapon alone. And I think most of my time I spent either using this or the shotgun, just going back and forth between either of them depending on whether I needed armor or not. And the fact that the weapon swapping speed is a lot slower now, combined with how redundant some of the weapons feel, also discourages changing away from it even more. Then of course, what would a Doom game be without the BFG, with the Dark Ages take on this being a humongous ballista / crossbow looking thing. And I do think the crossbow design is a neat idea and a cool way to integrate it into the whole medieval theme they've got going on. But ammo for this thing is rarer than photos of your mum with her clothes on. So it's absolutely still going to be that get out of jail free card, best reserved for the absolute most annoying encounters. As for the gameplay, well, the Dark Ages brings back that very familiar sandbox feel to the level design, where it just really lets you loose in all these different looking environments to wreak havoc. Really again perfectly capturing the whole I'm not locked in here with you, you're all locked in here with me kind of vibe. With there being 22 chapters in the story all up, some of which are played on foot, and then about 6 or 7 which either have you flying around on the back of a dragon, or in the cockpit of one of these humongous Titan suits, where Hugo Martin's earlier days working on Pacific Rim are really starting to show. What I'm not super fond of is how it seems every second level is a giant open map with like a dozen different secrets to find. And while this might sound good on paper, all it does is really just kinda kill the pacing. Because you genuinely forget what your overarching goal is when you're just aimlessly running around collecting the 50th gold pickup in that level. The Siege chapter is a perfect example of this. It's one early on at a point where you've gotten a few of the key weapons, and then there's enough stuff out there in the environment to really let you experiment with different tactics to try them all out. And it almost works like a second tutorial in a way. It's like a more advanced sandbox for the player to start getting a knack for some of the more intricate mechanics, along with how enemies behave before you get into those later game chapters where the difficulty really ramps up. Plus there's the 3 side challenges you can complete as well, earning extra gold that funnels back into the various upgrades, which is a mechanic that is also in all of the ensuing chapters. And an open map like this I think is fine, but when every second one is the same huge, super complex area to explore, that it ends up feeling like a bit of a slog trying to find everything. And yes, I know that all the Doom games have always encouraged lots of exploration and secret hunting, but the levels didn't take you an hour to get through every single time, not even close. Besides, you're not even really secret hunting either, because all of this stuff shows up on the map even before you've discovered it. So I can remember back to that hell level in Doom 2016 or the Ark Complex in Doom Eternal, where you spend an eternity looking around for all the secrets. Yeah, well, now imagine that for every second or third chapter, of which there is 22 in total. And I don't know, like it just doesn't feel very Doom-like to me. The other dilemma with this as well is that a lot of the items you need to upgrade your weapons and shield are all hidden away in these open maps, particularly these gems which unlock the higher tier weapon upgrades. With the top tier one usually hidden behind a barrier you can only access after destroying a bunch of randomly placed wolf statues hidden around the map. Okay. The other issue is that the checkpoints during these can often be super sporadic, and you usually only get one after completing a main objective, which means if you've been running around for 15 minutes and then either died or had the game crash, then all that progress is going to be lost. Something which could have been easily alleviated if they just included a manual save option, or heaven forbid it, a quick save. Yeah, imagine that, a Doom game you can quick save in.
Now that's sarcasm.
The other thing is that this also does remove the whole arena element to the combat as well, because compared to Doom Eternal, where you'd often walk into an area and then enemies would all spawn in, here it's like they're all just usually standing around waiting for you, giving you the option to choose how to engage them. with the most common type being these new variant of the Imps, who walk slowly towards you like they're the T-800 or something, firing off projectiles or occasionally leaping towards you. Then there's also those other familiar faces too, like the Hell Knights, the Mancubus, the Lost Souls, and the Pinkies. Although weirdly this time you only encounter these things when they're being ridden by other demons. And yeah, I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere about your mother and riding a demon, but it's not coming to me. Some of the redesigns for these iconic monsters do seem a bit bizarre. Like the Revenants, for instance, barely even resemble Revenants anymore. Now they're these floating wraith-looking things, wearing hoods that temporarily turn into ghosts and can't even be hit. And in fact, the only way to damage them is to wait for them to materialize or parry one of their projectiles, which seems to instantly bring them back to their physical form. Cacodemons, however, are by far the weirdest change, and this is an absolute look what they did to my boy kind of moment.
Look how they massacred my boy.
I mean, for starters, they don't even resemble cacodemons at all. Like, they instead look like the Octobrains from Duke Nukem. And then they don't even really fire projectiles all that much either. Instead, they fire out these slowly moving energy walls, which you need to dodge left and right to avoid.
Right on.
And that is something that kind of annoys me a little bit, is how almost every single enemy just has some kind of weird gimmick or trick that you have to adhere to every single time, where it's more about rote memorization than it actually is using any kind of free-forming strategy. With enemies like the Vagary, for instance, which I'm going to assume is a reference to the same enemy type in Doom 3, like these are a perfect example. Now these things are covered head to toe, or head to spindly leg I guess, in heavy armor, and the only way to beat them is to shatter their armor, piece by piece, every single time. And then a few of the other demons are very reminiscent of the Marauder behavior in Doom Eternal, in the sense that the distance you are from them affects how they behave. Like with this new variant of the Doom Hunters called the Agadon Hunter. Now if you hang back with these guys, they pop up a shield and fire out projectiles, but if you get in close, they drop the shield and then try to hit you, leaving them open to parrying and following up attacks. Essentially forcing you to fight them this one way, because you can't possibly go on the offensive or hang back because they're just gonna punish the shit out of you. Cyberdemon is also the same kind of thing, and if you stay back from this guy, he's just going to shoot at you with his chain gun arm, but then get in close and he pretty much only uses melee, which can easily be parried over and over and over. Standing right underneath the guy's toes and having him try to stomp you over and over like you're a cockroach that just won't fuck off. And again, an example of one strategy that you pretty much have to repeat every single time you encounter this enemy type. And because both of these demons have an Olympic swimming sized health pool, you more or less have to save them until last, because it can take upwards of 5 or 10 seconds of parrying to actually defeat them, which is not something you want to do when you've got a half a dozen other enemies running around in the background. One of the most tedious demons in that regard are these huge lizard-looking dudes that are carrying what's more or less chainsaw spears. Now they're called Komodos in-game, and the reach these things have is just insane. And you just spend so much time parrying their attacks that at one point I thought I started playing Black Myth Wukong and hadn't realized. Even with the boss fights, it's just like you spend 90% of the time on the defense, cowering down like a frightened turtle, just parrying this constant barrage of powerful attacks, which otherwise can kill you in seconds. But I think the worst ones are the buffed up demons that contain these player upgrades, where after you kill them you get an increase to your max ammo, armor or health. And for some reason they thought it'd be a good idea to give these guys 3 or 4 times the amount of health as the standard demons, making it even more laborious to take them out.
Eventually.
I mean, some of these fights, man, they just go fucking on. And there's nothing hard or challenging about it, it's just repeating the same parry move ad nauseum, and then shooting back until the stupid things finally die. And I don't know, like, it just doesn't feel like a Doom game at this point. It feels like I'm playing a first-person FromSoft clone or something. The Titan Suit chapters are another great example where all you're really doing here is just punching the same humongous demons over and over, dodging out of the way of a highly telegraphed attack and then repeating. And in fact, these are even easier, because the enemies are more or less moving in slow motion. After a few hits, you can charge up a meter and then unleash some kind of finisher. And it is a pretty cool, awesome visual spectacle, but that's pretty much all it has going for it. There is a bit of variety in there in that you can sometimes pick up a weapon, but even then the weapon has to be charged up by dodging enemies, the exact same way you do with the fists. And once you've beaten the first enemy you come up against, you've really seen all this combat has to offer, which then just makes it kind of tiresome the third time they bring a Titan Suit level back. Same thing too with all the dragon sequences, which is just about flying around and taking out all the same looking turrets on the same looking demonic ships a dozen or so times, where you're either dodging horizontally or dodging vertically, where there's again practically no skill to any of it, and so far artistically and mechanically removed from any other Doom game that we've ever had. I will say though that the takedowns here are pretty damn awesome, being some full-on Godzilla style shit.
That's a spicy meatball!
But I think overall, the big takeaway from the gameplay is how it's more about reacting to the enemy's behavior this time, as opposed to actually controlling the flow of the combat yourself. And when you also consider they've removed a lot of the mobility options, like the dash move, a double jump, and even environmental things like the jump pads, it really does make it all feel like a bit of a step backwards when you consider the movement. And I know that id Software have been saying from day one that this was going to be a more traditional back-to-basics Doom game, focusing on things like circle strafing, almost like what you could refer to as a boots-on-the-ground shooter. But it's kind of hard to not see all of this stuff as a bit of a step backwards. I'm not sure I'd say that it's bad, but yeah, it is different. And I just found that by the end of things, the Dark Ages was really starting to wear out its welcome, where I just found myself waiting for the whole thing to wrap up. I don't think it's really helping either that they essentially recycle the final boss 5 times. I mean, the first time you fight this guy, he's got 3 phases, and then after that, you fight him again for another 2. All of which is just a bit of a parry fest where your right mouse button's gonna get worn down. Some of the arenas in the late game are also just absolutely miserable to get through. Just a lot of really lame encounters where they think that throwing all of the toughest demons at you at once, in no real order, somehow constitutes a fun challenge. Sadly too, I did find the music to be a bit of a non-event in this, and half the time I didn't even notice it was going on in the background. I mean, it does make sense though, considering the music in Doom Eternal was basically Mick Gordon's Master of Puppets.
Who are you? You can't be here.
Which really is the main problem that the Dark Ages has overall, a lot of which isn't even really this game's fault. More the fact that this thing is a follow-up to motherfucking Doom Eternal. And I mean, you've really got to remember just how much of a big deal Doom Eternal was. I mean, not only was it a huge deal for the Doom series, but also just first-person shooters in general. It really pioneered this whole new subgenre of micromanaging your ammo, health and armor, which is something that really hadn't been done before. And after it came out, we got this whole slew of other quality titles trying to follow suit. So naturally, anything that follows something like this has some big shoes to fill, and realistically isn't going to be able to. It's like having to follow The Godfather Part 2, Terminator 2, Aliens, or Sister Act 2. Also, just consider the timing, how it came out during the height of the pandemic, where the outside world absolutely sucked. And then you got this gorgeous, fast-paced power fantasy that comes along and brilliantly lets us all indulge in some much-needed escapism. At the end of the day though, realistically, I think I just might have Doom fatigue. I mean, I've been into this series now for over 30 years. There's even old home videos of me and my sister playing around with a camcorder and making a bunch of dumb Doom videos in our backyard. And consider that we've essentially had 4 games now with this modern era of the whole Slayer character. I mean, it's literally the longest running iteration of the series we've had yet. The original game went from 1993 with Doom through to 97 with Doom 64. Then the Doom 3 saga ran from 2004 to 2005 with Resurrection of Evil. Then this current one has been going on for almost 10 years now. We had Doom 2016, Eternal in 2020, The Ancient Gods Part 1 and 2 in 2021, and now the Dark Ages in 2025. And I guess I'm just feeling a bit slayed out at this point. Does that mean that Doom the Dark Ages is bad? No, far from it. But it is worth mentioning that it isn't as amazing or groundbreaking as Eternal was. Not even close. And overall, it just doesn't hit the same way that Eternal did. Not to mention, a lot of the changes they've made here, which really were essential to differentiate it, end up taking away a lot of its identity, and really making it stand out a bit from the other entries. For the longest time, a lot of people always thought that Doom 3 was the black sheep in the franchise. Well, I think the Dark Ages is about to replace it. And I'm sure they'll make a couple of DLC episodes expanding the plot even more, and yeah, I'm sure they'll be fun to play. Honestly though, I just hope they give this guy some much needed R&R, because at this point there's a lot of other FPS franchises that could do with a bit more love as well.